Good morning, friends. Welcome to another Sunday morning here online. Glad that you are with us. And this morning we need to talk about fugu, lions and lambs. So let's get at it. I don't know if you had one of these growing up or not, but I believe it was the early 90s, hot summer night, and our church was hosting an end times conference. They had flown in a special speaker all the way from Australia. And the accent alone of this guy was so exotic to me. It lent an air of credibility just by the way he talked. And if he came from that far away, surely he must have something of value to say. And over 2 days, he put together all these maps and went through Revelation, explaining to us end times. And I don't remember a whole lot of what he said or what those maps entailed, but I do recall him talking about the coming of the Antichrist, and while he never sort of said a certain name, he hinted to Middle East and Europe and these powers colliding and creating some sort of Antichrist. And I remember this night, this warm summer night, me approaching him after the service, and there was a lot of people asking questions. Finally, I had my turn, and this child, sort of enthralled by it all, said to him, "Listen, who do you think the Antichrist is going to be?" And I remember him in a whispering tone saying, my best guess would be Adolf Hitler resurrected. And I thought, oh my goodness, it haunted me, this idea of the Antichrist being Adolf Hitler. And we talked for a little bit, and it was the early 90s, right? So he said, if I had to pick a number two, it would probably be Saddam Hussein, because Revelation talks a lot about Babylon, and Babylon is in modern day Iraq. So he kind of narrowed the window down for me. And I remember walking away that night with this almost magical feeling that I had been given a glimpse of the future through the book of Revelation and this special speaker. And it was both scary and enthralling at the same time. And if you're anything like me, the book of Revelation was used when we were growing up in faith to do endless speculation about the future. And it's the book of Revelation I want to talk about this morning. You see, the book of Revelation, in my mind, read so often as this end time prophecies encased in like colorful, cryptic clues. It is easily the most misunderstood and misused book of the Bible. In fact, much of the teaching we received about Revelation, for those of us who grew up in faith, it was nothing short of toxic, I would say. In fact, I think you could think of it this way. What is the oddest thing you've ever eaten? I like experimenting with food. I've had the opportunity to go to some exotic restaurants during my time. I've eaten crocodile, I've eaten ostrich, I've eaten rattlesnake, buffalo, and frog, but I have never eaten the blowfish. Consider that for a moment. Have any of you eaten blowfish? Now, in Japan, the blowfish is known as fugu, and it is one of the most sought-after culinary delicacies in the whole country. The Japanese eat 10,000 pounds of fugu a year. Restaurants that serve it are considered some of the finest in the country. I'm curious, in the comments here, have any of you tried fugu or blowfish? Because if you have, you are an incredibly brave soul. You see, the thing is, fugu is toxic. The fish's blood, liver, ovaries, and skin, they contain a toxin that is 1,200 times more poisonous than cyanide. And exposure the size of a pinhead is enough to kill you, which means even the tiniest of mistakes in its preparation could prove fatal. And more than 100 people a year die as a result of eating improperly handled fugu. In fact, the fish's toxicity is kind of part of the allure of eating it. It's kind of part of the mystique around it. It's like a little bit of playing Russian roulette every time you take a bite. Fugu poisoning has been described as rapid and violent, and it sounds awful. Within minutes of eating, a person will start to feel first numbness around their mouth, and then it's followed by complete body paralysis, and then finally death. And it can all happen within 60 minutes of taking a bite. And what is worse yet is that the unfortunate eater, the unfortunate diner, remains conscious to the very end. Even still, for the Japanese at least, the taste, the texture, and the danger of the fish make fugu this sought-after delicacy in Japan and other parts of Asia. In fact, the fish is so dangerous that in Japan, in order to curb like street vendors from serving fugu, Japan, they instituted this strict licensing program for anyone that wanted to serve the fish. And so to be able to serve the fish today in Japan, a chef must spend 2 to 4 years training before they have to pass a written test, a fish identification test, and then they have to do a practical test where they have to prepare it and then eat it themselves. And the consequences of a mistake there could be bad. But in general, a third of people who go through this training, they fail. And even for those that pass, once they do in their license, they must then spend up to another 10 years apprenticing under a master fugu chef. And so to earn the title of fugu chef in Japan, it's like to be considered one of the elite of Japan's highly competitive culinary world. And yet the interesting thing to me is this: while the fish is incredibly toxic, it also offers a powerful agent that can relieve incredible suffering. And this has been a recent development with the fish. Scientists have recently managed to isolate an active ingredient within the poison that obviously doesn't come with the deadly effects, and it produces one of the most effective painkillers in the world. It is 3,000 times stronger than morphine, and it can relieve pain for up to 21 days. The best part, unlike other painkillers, it's non-addictive and has no side effects. Science is beginning to unlock the marvels and the beauty of this fish and how it can benefit humans. And so to me, Revelation, you could say, is like the fugu fish. It's a delicacy, to be sure. It's rich in taste and texture, unlike anything you'll find almost anywhere else in the Bible. And it also has the potential, I would say, to relieve suffering, but it's all in how it's handled. How it's handled is of the utmost importance. If you get the book wrong, it can be toxic to those you're serving it to. It's not a book you want handled by like the YouTube equivalent of an internet sensational chef, right? Like you want this book to be served to you by like Michelin star chefs, right? Like Alain Ducasse or Gordon Ramsay or Yoshishiro Murata or Seiji Yamamoto. Those are some of Japanese great chefs, those last two. Like you don't want some guy named Larry on YouTube serving this up for you, right? And I get it. All analogies eventually break down, and this would probably be a good time to mention the shortcomings of this particular analogy, because I can imagine some of you across internet land there thinking, my goodness, we had no idea, Brad, that you were the equivalent of a Michelin star chef when it comes to handling Revelation. All this time, we had no idea you had been training and apprenticing for so many years to understand and handle the book correctly. Brad, just stop being humble about it and be out with it. Are you a book of Revelation expert? And the answer to that is no, I am certainly not. If you ask me what each of the 7 seals in Revelation means, I'll be honest, I won't be able to tell you. And listen, I took a class back in my undergrad days on the book of Revelation. It was highly enlightening. And I'm currently taking a course on Revelation right now. I'm in my 18th week, and boy, has it been good. But alas, I'll confess I am no Michelin star chef when it comes to handling the book. But I suppose the question then becomes, well, how do we know that I'm not going to serve you a toxic take on the book? Well, I did in the fall. I was contemplating doing this whole series at Nexus on the book, taking us chapter 1, chapter 22, right beginning to end. But I quickly realized, I think if I did that, I would end up serving some poisonous stew that would either bore everyone to death, or we'd end up being one of those churches with maps and charts on the wall. And let's be honest, nobody wants that. Instead, what I want to do is I want to spend just 3 weeks in the book, showcasing how if we understand the book well, it is not toxic at all. In fact, it can be a delicacy. It gives us an important look at who Jesus is and what that reveals about God. And so I would say this, understood well, Revelation can be a tasty treat amidst the bland buffet of faith jargons and cliches we often come across. At the same time, it can also alleviate the suffering we experienced with half-baked theology. And as to my qualifications, well, I would say this. I am no Michelin star chef, but carry the analogy a little further. I've been hanging out in the kitchen with some of the greats, some of the great minds thinking about Revelation. I've been hanging out in the kitchen taking notes. I'm not ready to handle the fish myself, but taking notes in the kitchen. So I'm not going to share with you or serve you the whole book on a platter, but I want to just give you a few notes that I've taken over the last little while, and I think it will be enlightening for us. So hopefully that's fair. But again, if you ask me what each horse of the apocalypse means, I'm probably not going to be able to tell you. So I'll just send you to the expert chefs. With that in mind, though, here are some notes from the kitchen, some guiding thoughts that can help us enjoy the delicacy of Revelation without ingesting its toxins. Here we go. What is the book of Revelation? Well, contrary to some popular authors, it is not an end times predictor. Shocking, I know. Rather, it is a prophetic critique of the Roman Empire in light of Jesus' path. Now, in the book, you will encounter fantastical imagery, a beast, a false prophet, a harlot of Babylon, and all of those images are symbols of Rome and Caesar. And what we find in this book is that a war is being waged on the idolatry of the Roman Empire. You say, well, why is the book of Revelation worth tasting from today? Well, I would say this. It's one of the earliest forms of resistance literature. It's a manifesto, you could say, on how to be anti-colonial, anti-empire via the Jesus path. And sort of 2,000 years before colonialism sort of became a bad word to us, John the Revelator is sort of ringing the bell, right? Sounding the alarm bells. And by the time Revelation was written, this is the interesting thing. It had been about 20 years since Christians had suffered persecution under Nero, under Rome. And 20 years later, they're starting to get along pretty well in the empire. They're thriving. They're living peacefully. So they're doing quite well and they're getting comfortable. And John the Revelator is like, whoa, 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 don't get too comfortable here. Don't lose track of the evils of empire. Remember, the empire is still a beast. Of course, another thing to keep in mind if we want to avoid the toxins of Revelation while enjoying its delicacies is this. Revelation is a prophetic interpretation of the cataclysmic events of the AD 70s. You see, the book is written in the late 90s, but its setting is after the death of Nero in 68. And it's kind of like you could think about it this way. If I had authored a book in the year 2000, and I had predicted that a time was coming when New York's Twin Towers were going to fall and be hit by airplanes, and that following this there would be a war, and America would be looking for weapons of mass destructions, and then war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then there would be a market crash in 2008, a global pandemic, today. Everyone would have thought back in 2000 in hindsight that I was some kind of prophet or seer. But if I wrote that book today detailing all those events, you wouldn't think I was a predictor of end times. You'd probably ask me what my take is on history. And this is a key to understanding Revelation, keeping those toxins away. Revelation is a post-diction book, not a prediction book. It is written as if it's predicting what's going to happen, but it's written after the fact, which of course makes the task much easier. And what it's addressing is the world-altering events of the late 60s and 70s in the ancient world, because this decade in the ancient world, it was a time of unparalleled change and catastrophe. It turned the world absolutely upside down. I mean, for us to even compare or think about what this would be like, it would be like having the Great Depression, World War II, 9/11, and the COVID pandemic all happen within the same decade. And for these ancient people, this decade changed everything. I mean, first, of course, you had Christians. They were persecuted under Nero, so a time of fear and suffering. But then, of course, there were also these plagues that broke out in Rome, and there was crop failure in Egypt, and Egypt was the breadbasket of the world. So we got a global food supply issue going on. And then it's followed by the city of Jerusalem being completely ransacked. And for the Jewish people, this was like the end of an age. Their city, their holy temple had completely leveled. And then also in the news, right, you have things like Mount Vesuvius erupting and completely destroying, covering the city of Pompeii. I mean, for people living through that decade and beyond, it felt as if the world had gone to hell. And a whole lot of the imagery we find within the book, it comes from events like these. Another great tasting note from the kitchen of the great chefs trained to serve Revelation to us as a delicacy and not a toxin is simply this: everything in the book of Revelation is symbolic. Everything. Now, there are two good reasons for this, and we have to wrestle and reckon with them. The first is this: John the Revelator was a political prisoner. I mean, he's exiled on the island of Patmos. He had been sent there as a political prisoner. So it's not like he can exactly go around writing plainly, hey, Rome is evil, look out, you got to resist it. I mean, to do that, well, his letter probably wouldn't have made it anywhere. And of course, it's going to cause him even more trouble with the authorities. I mean, it's kind of like, imagine today, if you go spouting off enough on social media and to a big enough platform that America is evil and it must be resisted, you might not be too long before you find yourself on the FBI target, list there somehow, right? You might exactly get some attention you don't want. And so John is very, very careful never to mention Rome directly. Instead, he's got these fantastic images of Babylon and the beast and this great harlot. I mean, they're all veiled references to Caesar, Nero. They're veiled references to Rome. It's subversive literature. It's a form of resistance to Rome, you could say. Second, though, and more importantly, right, he's trying to contend, you could say, in this book with empire imagery here. You see, the Roman Empire, it was filled with images to shape the imagination of the populace. And this was very deliberate, right? They've got their statues, their temples, their architecture, their inscriptions, and they all portray Rome as the recipient of blessings from the god and goddesses. And so John wants to give the Christian imagination a counter way of thinking about the world. And of course, empire shaping people through imagery is certainly not unique to Rome. Every single empire does this. I mean, consider the most contemporary of examples. You know, after the January 6th insurrection last year, and we're getting all this footage inside the Capitol in Washington, D.C. It got me curious. I never really thought about the art and imagery there. But I never knew this, started looking up, got curious. What sort of art is in there? The Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. is painted with the apotheosis of Washington. Now, if you take a look at the image in the rotunda, what you see here is George Washington ascended to heaven, and sitting beside him are the gods of victory and liberty, freedom. And of course, the image is what? When we look at that, what is it? It's an American idolatrous trinity. What they've made into the sacred, the divine, are victory, Washington, and freedom. These are their gods, and it's inscribed right on the roof of their capital. And see, what John understood and what we need to understand today, why it's worth reading today, is this: empires are never neutral. They are always looking for our allegiance. There's always ideas behind them, ideologies, beliefs. There's always something that empires want us to believe and trust. And so each empire throughout history has its imagery and its symbols to reinforce its message, its propaganda, you could say. And so whether it's Rome or we're talking about America today, you could think of it this way. America, like Rome, is both empire and religion. When Revelation was written, Rome was seen, right, as blessed by the gods. It was their manifest destiny to rule the world. They were the true saviors, peacekeepers of the world. They were the bringers of the Pax Romana. Their rule, it was thought, would bring order and prosperity to the world. That's not so different today from Western desire, right, to spread democracy and capitalism, right? The idea is that every empire believes they're the savior of the world. They're the ones who will bring peace and prosperity. And what John the Revelator wants to do with this book is give Christians counter images to resist that notion. And so if you read, I would encourage you, it's just a trip. If you read Revelation, it's overflowing with images, and it alternates between the grotesque and beautiful and erotic and sensational and monstrous as well. And so we've got like these diamond and gold cities, we've got lakes of fire, we got rivers of blood, a monstrous beast coming up out of the sea. I mean, the book of Revelation was meant to be read, but you also get the sense, right, that John the Revelator almost has like this is a script for the stage, right? It's meant to be seen. It's meant almost to be acted out like a Greco-Roman play with costumes and special effects, because the book bombards the imagination so that our imagination, you could say, becomes colonized in a new kind of way. It gives us images to hang on the walls of our minds so that we have counter images to the propaganda of empire. But of course, these images needed to be handled with extreme care, because if we take any of these images literally, oh boy, the book can end up being toxic real quick. All the images in Revelation are symbolic, all of them. And because of that, the images, they're not timeless and universal. I mean, it's a fool's errand to start asking questions whether certain symbols in Revelation are pointing to modern day Russia or the European Union. I mean, it's just absurd to go down that route. It's a recipe for poison. It has to be handled with care, because not only does the book have over 200 references pointing towards the Old Testament, it's very much steeped in the events of the late 60s and 70s AD. And so, again, it needs to be treated with care. We're not going to find China or America or Russia specifically, but of course we can extrapolate, but it's just not there. And we need to be careful to never sort of go looking for that. But finally, beyond all that, Revelation is an unveiling. The book is meant to be an opening, a tearing in two, you could say, of the thin veil we understand as reality. Because on one hand, the world of the 60s and 70s was this incredibly tumultuous time. Jerusalem ransacked, Christians persecuted, famine, plagues, volcanic eruptions. I mean, the world really did feel like it was going to hell. But what John is trying to do is lift the veil and remind his readers that beyond the veil of reality, there's something else happening behind. See what's happening. John wants to prompt them to see what's happening in God's realm, in heaven, while all these hellish events are unfolding. And so you could say, get a little sci-fi, but maybe not here, but it's an exposure to a deeper reality, an exposure to another layer, use the popular parlance of the day, another layer in the multiverse. It's an exposure to another dimension of reality, the heavenly dimension that's happening at the same time this hellish thing is going on. And what we see unveiled in this book is that there's a cosmic drama playing out, and it's really just this. Revelation is the story of a cosmic battle between two forces, a lamb, who is Jesus, and a beast, which is Rome or empire. See, what John is trying to do here is tell us that Rome's claim, which they were making, that they had some sort of divine right to rule all the nations of the world and that they had a manifest destiny to shape history in their image, that all of that is complete idolatry. Any nation, any empire that tries to shape history after itself, that claims it has the right to rule the world, it's idolatry. And that right, according to John, right, is the authority that God has given to Jesus alone. And so Revelation's like this battle scene. Jesus versus Rome. Jesus versus empire. And of course, the book sets us up for a cosmic battle, but how this battle plays out is shocking. And so before we get into sort of some deeper drama next week that will address some of our uncomfortable images about Jesus, let me just take you very briefly into sort of the first act of this theatrical story that the book is telling. So what happens is the book opens with an introductory chapter, and then it's followed by 2 chapters, right, where Jesus gives personal messages to the 7 churches in Asia. And I want to touch on those briefly during Lent. But then after those 3 chapters, we're transported for the next 2 chapters into the realm of heaven, and we're given like a witness of this massive worship parade event. And for those listening or hearing or seeing this play out in their imaginations, the desired effect was to make Rome's parades of worship and military might seem kind of like child's play, seem pale in comparison. But then the sort of drama of the story begins in chapter 5. I saw that there was a scroll in the right hand of the one sitting on the throne. The scroll was written on the inside and the outside, and it was sealed with 7 seals. I saw a strong angel announcing in a loud voice, "Does anybody deserve to open the scroll, to undo its seals?" And nobody in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or look at it. I burst into tears because it seemed that there was nobody who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside of it. One of the elders, however, spoke to me. "Don't cry," he said. "Look, the Lion from the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has won the victory. He can open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures and in the midst of the elders a lamb. It was standing there as though it had been slaughtered. It had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. The Lamb came up and took the scroll from the right hand of the one who was sitting on the throne. Again, crazy imagery here, right? We're in this other dimension here, but the drama begins. John the Revelator, he's got this glimpse of what's going on in this other dimension, this heavenly dimension, and he's looking at this sealed scroll. And the scroll seems to represent God's intentions for humanity in the world. I mean, the scroll seems to be God's intention for where the story of humanity, the story of the cosmos is headed and how to get there. This scroll seems to be the project of redemption, you could say. And if anyone could open and read the scroll, then God's plan to redeem and make new the whole world, it could be realized and implemented. But the drama of the scene, after searching all of history, searching all of humanity, both the living and the dead, no one is found worthy to open this scroll, this plan of redemption. Even the great Jewish heroes of old, of history, they're found to be unworthy. There's not a great emperor or president or king anywhere in history who's found worthy to open the scroll. No one could preside over God's redemption plan, it would seem, and not screw it up. No one is worthy. And so John the Revelator begins to weep. For him, his conclusion here is it would seem that all hope has been lost. We humans are trapped in a tragedy of our own making. We're forever doomed, you could say, to live in a world of famine and natural disasters and war and poverty and greed. It appears to John at this moment that this is the permanent condition of humanity. No one can be found to make God's plan happen. And so John's depressed. John's in grief. And I mean, if you think about it, if you actually believe that, it would be depressing to think about, to truly know or believe that the repeated cycles of world history are the only possibility for the world's future. I mean, that's enough to make any person cry and weep. It is a tragedy. But then John's guide into this heavenly realm, one of these 24 elders, he intervenes in the scene and he instructs John to look, because the Lion of Judah has overcome, won a victory, and into a world filled with the beasts of climate change, violence, war, greed, poverty, lust for power. Nothing can challenge the beasts of power, these beasts. But the elder says, now hold on here, wait a minute. Here comes the Lion. I mean, is there any animal more fitting as a symbol of great power and might than the lion? I remember touring Masai Mara in Kenya, in Tanzania, and what an experience it was. And I just had one desire the whole time. I wanted to see a lion kill. I wanted to see them hunt down something, take it out. I know it's a bit grotesque, but it's the circle of life, it's nature and all that. I desperately want to see it. So I got up early that morning because they hunt in the morning, and there were a few others in our little tour truck van thing there that were a little late getting ready, so we didn't get out as early as I wanted, but we're touring around that day and, we're looking, come on, we can do this. And sure enough, there were vultures in the distance. A kill had been made. We had missed the kill by minutes, but we got over right as the lions were consuming this zebra. And the kill was fresh. One of the lions was still holding on to its neck. It wasn't moving gratefully. It was dead by then, but I distinctly remember the sounds of lion teeth on flesh and bone, gnawing, ripping this thing open. I mean, it was a thing of awe, but also terror. I mean, just the raw strength of a lion to take down and kill the beasts of the Serengeti. I mean, it was just a marvelous awe thing to watch, the power of a lion. And of course, the lion has always served as a great metaphor for power and strength. And that's what makes this scene so interesting to me, because it's like, wait, there's hope. The lion has arrived. Yes, there are beasts in this world, but the lion has arrived. And so perhaps there is still hope. But again, you got to imagine this scene playing out on stage as if you were in an old amphitheater, right? And the elder on stage says, wait, there's hope. A lion is coming. The lion who has overcome is coming. And it's a setup, I think, for one of the most comical and significant moments in the entire book of Revelation. And the audience is looking, you're waiting to see the lion take the stage, to take on this beast. And what appears when the spotlight turns on the stage and something comes sauntering in from off stage, you're expecting this ferocious lion, and what appears is a lamb, a little slaughtered lamb. I mean, just imagine that. Watching this play on stage, and you've been coaxed, you've been primed for this powerful beast, this lion to arrive. And as it's about to take the stage, there is no lion, just a tiny slaughtered lamb. What John is telling us in the most subversive, beautiful way is that the beasts of Rome, of empire, of greed, violence, and a lust for power, they will be conquered not by another superpower beast, but by a little already slaughtered lamb. This to me is extraordinary, and why churches should be constantly telling us to rethink everything, because this is what John is doing. Rethink everything, John is saying. Rethink everything you think you know about how the world works and operates. Rethink everything you know about how change is made in this world. It is not the way of beastly power, but the way of the slaughtered lamb. We don't fight beasts by becoming beasts ourselves. And to me, it is such a sad commentary that within Christian circles, I've heard plenty of sermons and worship songs that extol Jesus as both the lion and the lamb, right? I mean, I can picture some of them in my head, some of these songs. And the extrapolation has been, the unfortunate thing is that we end up with just this toxic masculine Jesus. We've heard about Rambo Jesus and Jesus the warrior and Jesus the lion, but all of them miss the point entirely. They have been fed, you could say, toxic fugu revelation. There is no lion in Revelation, only a slaughtered little lamb. And Jesus, of course, he came from the tribe of Judah. And back in the Old Testament, the lion became like the clan tartan. It became the symbol of the tribe of Judah. They were the lion tribe of Judah. But Jesus is a lion in heritage only. The great surprise and reversal of Revelation is this: if we're looking for a Jesus who is a lion, we will never find him. Jesus is a lamb. And is there any animal on the planet more harmless than a lamb? I mean, this is part of the first pleasant surprise about Revelation if you start to rethink it, and if it's been served well to you, if it's been cooked right. This starts to reverse so many images we've received of the Jesus of Revelation, this warrior, this Jesus of revenge. It's all hogwash. It's toxic fugu. This great surprise of Revelation is this: we're told that Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, but he looks nothing like emperors and kings and presidents and tyrants. He doesn't rule like a predatory lion, but as a sacrificial lamb. And I think this is part of the comedy of Revelation, because when we think to ourselves, how are empires conquered? We know, we love these stories. Our imaginations are filled with movies and images, right, of William Wallace, Braveheart, the ferocious warrior. How do you take down the English? Well, you need a William Wallace, a Braveheart, a warrior. There's probably no genre of film I love more than World War II films. I mean, it's just fantastic, whether it's Dunkirk lately, by Christopher Nolan, Saving Private Ryan. I love these movies because they stir something within us, and images of allied power as it storms the beaches of Normandy, right? We love stories of resistors who took up arms and became more vicious beasts, more ferocious beasts than the ones they were trying to conquer. That is how empires are broken. But the comedy of Revelation is, well, is that the way? The beasts of empire are conquered not by another beast, but by the tiny slaughtered lamb. When we speak of Jesus as the lion and the lamb, we're missing the point. That's just the joke of Scripture. The lion is the lamb. Jesus isn't king of the jungle or king of the beasts. He's no beast at all. And anything that seems beastly about him is not of him. And we have to remember that as we dive deeper into Revelation, into things Jesus said about hell and fire. And of course, Matthew 24, Jesus is the lamb, the meek lamb, the slaughtered lamb. There's nothing beastly about him. And what that reveals to us is that there's nothing beastly about God. God's intentions for the world will come not from vying for power, not in by being the bigger beast, not in taking up arms or winning power chess matches, but through the sacrificial lamb, through the sacrificial way of the Jesus path, which is love. And as the Revelation story goes, this lamb is found worthy to open the scroll. The lamb is worthy to enact and deliver God's plan of redemption for humanity and the entire cosmos. You know, the book of Revelation gives us some of the most imaginative symbols ever around Jesus, but the book doesn't need to scare us, and the book doesn't need to be toxic. In fact, when served well, I think what we find in the book is an inspiring vision. Jesus, the one who will bring about God's good intentions for every human being, every living thing, comes not by the way of the lion, but by the way of the lamb. And that's good news. Friends, thank you so much for joining us this morning, indulging me a little bit and getting some initial info out of the way around Revelation. We can dive in a little bit deeper now. Some of these themes are going to keep coming up, but it's a tricky book, and I don't like shying away from tricky things. So we're diving in here, and I hope that we're starting to get a clear picture throughout the early part of this year of what God is like, and hopefully clearing up some some errors, mistakes made in the past, giving us a clearer vision of Jesus, clearer vision of God. That's my hope and intention for this series as we make our way to Lent. And boy, do I have some exciting ideas around that. We will get to that come March. But until then, friends, I hope you're having a great week, even though there's all this snow. Until next time, go in peace.